Marcus Thornhill had stood in the same spot for nearly 15 years. His black uniform was always pressed to perfection. His boots shined until they reflected the palace chandeliers, and his posture never wavered. He was a royal sentinel, one of the most trusted guards at Kensington Palace. His job was simple: stand, watch, and protect. No talking, no moving unless necessary, and certainly no emotions. The morning started like any other Tuesday in March. Marcus arrived at the palace gates at 5 in the morning, well before the sun painted the London sky with its golden light. He changed into his uniform in the guardhouse, checking every button and every crease. His colleague Thomas gave him a tired nod as they passed each other during the shift change. Another day in paradise. Thomas muttered sarcastically. Marcus didn't respond. He never did. He took his position at the east corridor, near the family's private quarters. This was his spot, his territory. He knew every painting on these walls, every crack in the marble floor, every sound that echoed through the hallways at different times of the day. The palace was slowly waking up. He could hear the distant clatter of kitchen staff preparing breakfast, the soft footsteps of housekeepers beginning their morning routines, and the occasional voice of a secretary rushing past with files tucked under their arms. Marcus remained still, his eyes forward, his mind present but detached. He had mastered the art of being invisible while being completely visible. Tourists who visited the palace would often try to make him laugh or flinch. Children would wave at him. Adults would take photos. Marcus had learned to tune it all out. He was not a person in these moments. He was a fixture, like the marble columns or the gold-framed portraits. That was his duty, and he performed it with absolute dedication. But lately, something had begun to shift inside Marcus. He couldn't quite name it at first. It was a feeling that crept up on him during the quiet hours of his shifts, a restlessness, a questioning. He was 42 years old, and he had spent more than a third of his life standing still. What did he have to show for it? A pension plan? A collection of service medals? The respect of his peers? His daughter, Emma, had asked him recently why he never smiled anymore. She was only 9 years old, but her question had struck something deep within him. Marcus had looked at her across the dinner table, fork frozen in midair, and realized he didn't have an answer. When had he stopped smiling? When had joy become something he observed in others rather than felt himself? His wife Sarah had been patient over the years. She understood the demands of his job, the odd hours, the physical toll of standing for 8 to 10 hours at a stretch, but even she had begun to make comments. "You're here, but you're not really here," she had said just last week. Marcus had brushed it off then, but her words echoed in his mind now as he stood in the corridor. The sound of small footsteps pulled Marcus from his thoughts. He didn't move his head, but his eyes shifted slightly. It was Prince George, the young prince who was second in line to the throne. The boy was walking down the corridor with his nanny, chattering excitedly about something to do with a school project. George was around 10 years old now, growing taller each month but still carrying that innocent energy that all children possessed. Marcus had seen George countless times over the years. He had watched the little prince grow from a toddler who could barely walk steadily to the confident young boy he was now, but Marcus never interacted with him. That wasn't his place. Royal guards maintained a professional distance. They were protectors, not companions. George paused near Marcus, his attention caught by something on the wall. It was an old painting of a naval battle, ships with billowing sails clashing on stormy seas. The nanny was a few steps ahead, talking on her phone quietly, giving instructions to someone about the afternoon schedule. "Do you think it was scary?" George asked suddenly. Marcus's eyes flickered with confusion, but he remained still. The boy wasn't talking to him, was he? Royal protocols were clear. The guards didn't engage in conversation with the family unless directly addressed in an emergency. "Being on those ships during a battle," George continued, still looking at the painting. "My teacher says sailors were very brave. They didn't have motors or anything. Just wind and their own strength." The nanny glanced back. "Your Highness, we need to keep moving. You have your mathematics tutor in 20 minutes. I know, George said, but he didn't move immediately. Instead, he turned and looked directly at Marcus. "Do you think they were scared?" Marcus felt his breath catch. The boy was speaking to him. A direct question. He should maintain protocol. Remain silent, let the nanny handle it. But something about the genuine curiosity in George's young face made Marcus hesitate. "Everyone feels fear, Your Highness," Marcus heard himself say quietly. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite it." George's eyes widened slightly as if he hadn't expected a response. Then a smile broke across his face. "That's what my dad says too." "Well, something like that." He paused, studying Marcus's uniform. "Do you get scared doing your job?" "Sometimes," Marcus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I stand here anyway." "That makes you brave then," George said with the simple logic of a child. "Thank you for protecting us." The nanny had turned back now, noticing the conversation. "Your Highness, please," she urged gently. George gave Marcus one more smile and then hurried after his nanny, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded completely. Marcus remained in position, but something inside his chest felt different, lighter somehow. Heavier at the same time. A child had thanked him. A simple gesture, a few words of recognition. But in 15 years of service, no one had ever directly acknowledged what he did with such genuine appreciation. Tourists thanked him sometimes, but it felt performative, like thanking a statue for existing. George's gratitude had been real, spontaneous, human. Marcus's shift continued for another 4 hours. He stood through the lunch period, through the changing of the light as afternoon arrived, through the various comings and goings of palace staff and family members. But his mind kept returning to that brief exchange. The weight of the young prince's simple thanks pressed on him in ways he couldn't fully understand. When his shift finally ended, Marcus walked to the guardhouse in a daze. He changed back into his civilian clothes, folded his uniform with mechanical precision, and headed toward the car park. The evening air was cool against his face, refreshing after hours inside the temperature-controlled palace. Marcus drove home through the London traffic, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The city rushed past his windows in a blur of lights and movement, but he barely registered any of it. His mind was still in that corridor, still hearing the young prince's voice, still feeling the unexpected warmth of being truly seen. When he pulled into the driveway of his modest home in South London, Sarah was visible through the kitchen window preparing dinner. The warm glow from inside painted a picture of comfort and normalcy. Marcus sat in his car for a moment longer than usual, just watching. When had he started feeling like an outsider to his own life? "Dad." Emma burst through the front door before he had even reached it, throwing her arms around his waist. "You're home. Can you help me with my history homework? It's about kings and queens, and I thought you would know because you work at the palace." Marcus hugged her back, feeling the fierce love he had for this little person who saw him as a hero rather than a statue. "Let me change first, sweetheart. Then we'll tackle it together." Sarah greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, her eyes searching his face. She had always been good at reading him, even when he tried to hide what he was feeling. "Long day?" "Just the usual," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Dinner was a simple affair of roasted chicken and vegetables, but the conversation around the table was lively. Emma talked non-stop about her day at school, about her best friend Lucy, who had gotten in trouble for passing notes during science class, about the upcoming school play where she desperately wanted to be cast as a tree. "A tree?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "Why a tree?" "Because trees are important, Dad. They give us oxygen and homes for animals, and they're strong and quiet, but everyone notices them." Emma's logic was unshakable. Strong and quiet, but everyone notices them. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. Was that what he had become? A human tree? Present but not truly participating in life around him? After dinner, Marcus helped Emma with her homework. They sat at the dining table, her textbook open between them, filled with pictures of royal processions and historic ceremonies. She asked him questions about palace life, but he realized how little he actually knew beyond his own corridor. He could tell her about the paintings and the architecture, but he knew nothing about the people who lived there. Nothing real anyway. "Do you ever talk to the princes and princesses?" Emma asked, her pencil hovering over her notebook. Marcus thought about that morning. "Not usually. Today I spoke briefly with Prince George." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? What did you say?" "What was he like?" "Is he nice?" "He was very polite," Marcus said carefully. "He asked me about bravery. What did you tell him?" Marcus repeated what he had said about fear and courage. Emma listened intently, then nodded with satisfaction. "That's good, Dad. That's really good." She paused, then added, "I think you're very brave. Standing still for so long must be really hard. I can't even sit still during assembly at school." After Emma went to bed, Marcus and Sarah sat in the living room with cups of tea. The television was on, but neither of them was really watching it. Sarah finally broke the comfortable silence. "Something happened today," she observed. It wasn't a question. Marcus took a long sip of his tea, buying time. How could he explain that a 30-second conversation with a child had somehow shaken the foundation of everything he thought he knew about his life? "Prince George thanked me for protecting them." Sarah waited, knowing there was more. It was the way he said it, like he really meant it. Like he saw me as a person, not just a uniform. Marcus set his cup down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Sarah, I've been doing this job for 15 years. 15 years of standing in the same spot, watching life happen around me but never being part of it. And today, a 10-year-old boy showed me more genuine human kindness than I've experienced in all that time." Sarah reached over and took his hand. "What are you saying, Marcus?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I just feel like I've been asleep and now I'm waking up and I'm not sure I like what I see." They talked late into the night about dreams deferred and sacrifices made. Marcus had taken the Royal Guard position for the stability, for the good salary, for the pension. They had been young and needed security, especially with Emma on the way. But somewhere along the line, the job had stopped being just a job. It had become his entire identity. Marcus the Sentinel, Marcus the Guard. Never just Marcus the man. The next morning, Marcus went through his routine on autopilot. Shower, shave, breakfast, uniform, drive. But when he took his position in the East Corridor, everything felt different. The walls seemed closer. The air felt thinner. His body, usually so accustomed to the stillness, felt restless. He watched the palace come to life around him with new eyes. A young maid rushed past, tears streaming down her face, clearly upset about something. An older gentleman in an expensive suit walked by, talking urgently on his phone about a canceled meeting. Two secretaries gossiped in hushed tones near a doorway, their laughter sharp and unkind. All this human drama, and Marcus stood separate from it all. A witness but never a participant. Was this really what he wanted for the rest of his career? Another 20 years of being present but absent? Around mid-morning he saw George again. The young prince was with his siblings this time, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis. They were being herded along by their governess, all dressed smartly for what looked like an official engagement. George glanced in Marcus's direction and gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile of recognition. That simple gesture felt like a weight and a gift at the same time. Marcus had been acknowledged again, seen again. But it also highlighted the vast gulf between them. George would go on to have adventures, make decisions, live a life full of choices and consequences. And Marcus would stand here, watching it all from the sidelines. His shift ended at 3 that afternoon. As he changed out of his uniform, his supervisor, Captain Reynolds, stopped by the guardhouse. Reynolds was a career military man who had been with the Palace Guard for over 30 years. "Thornhill, a word," Reynolds said, his tone brisk but not unfriendly. Marcus straightened. "Yes, sir. I've been reviewing the duty rosters for next month. There's an opportunity for a senior position opening up. More responsibility, better pay, but it means more hours and higher visibility. You've been reliable, consistent. I'd like to put your name forward." It was exactly the kind of opportunity Marcus would have jumped at a week ago. Career advancement, validation, security. "Can I think about it, sir?" Reynolds looked surprised. "Think about it? Thornhill, this is a significant opportunity. Most guards would—" "I understand, sir. I just need a few days to consider it with my family." Reynolds studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have until Friday to give me your answer." Marcus drove home feeling like he was standing at a crossroads. One path led to more of the same, deeper entrenchment in a role that was slowly hollowing him out. The other path was unclear, undefined, terrifying, but somewhere on that unclear path was the possibility of actually living instead of just standing still. The next few days passed in a strange fog for Marcus. He went through the motions of his duties, standing in his assigned position, maintaining his professional demeanor, but internally he was in turmoil. Every interaction he witnessed, every conversation that floated past him, every moment of genuine human connection that occurred within his view felt like a reminder of what he was missing. On Wednesday afternoon, something happened that would cement the feelings growing inside him. Marcus was at his post when he heard raised voices coming from one of the nearby offices. It wasn't unusual for discussions to become heated in the palace, but this sounded different, more personal, more painful. A young staff member couldn't have been more than 25 emerged from the office with red-rimmed eyes. She was clutching a cardboard box filled with personal belongings, the universal symbol of sudden unemployment. Her hands were shaking as she walked past Marcus, trying desperately to maintain her composure. Marcus watched her struggle with the heavy box and her dignity simultaneously. His training told him to remain still, to not interfere, but something inside him rebelled against that training. This was a human being in distress, and he was just standing there like a piece of furniture. The woman dropped a framed photograph from her box. It clattered to the marble floor, the glass cracking in a spiderweb pattern. She let out a small sob and bent down to pick it up, but the box was too full and awkward. Items started to spill out. Marcus broke protocol. He moved from his position and knelt down beside her, helping to gather the fallen items. A coffee mug with a silly joke printed on it, a small potted succulent, a desk calendar with personal notes scribbled in the margins. "Thank you," she whispered, not meeting his eyes. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be falling apart like this in the middle of the corridor." "Everyone falls apart sometimes," Marcus said quietly, carefully placing the cracked photo frame on top of her other belongings. "It's what makes us human." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Marcus saw his own reflection in her eyes. Two people performing roles, wearing uniforms of different kinds, both trapped in systems that reduced them to functions rather than recognizing them as people. "I gave them 3 years, she said, her voice bitter. 3 years of early mornings and late nights. I missed my sister's wedding because there was an important event. I skipped holidays because they needed coverage. And they let me go because of a mistake I didn't even make. Someone else messed up a schedule, but I was the convenient scapegoat." Marcus helped her stand, steadying the box in her arms. "I'm sorry that happened to you. The worst part is I actually loved this job. I felt like I was part of something important." She laughed, but it was hollow. "Stupid, right? To think I mattered." "You do matter," Marcus said firmly. "Your value isn't determined by whether they recognized it or not." She gave him a sad smile, adjusted her grip on the box, and walked away. Marcus watched her go, then returned to his position. But his heart was pounding. He had broken protocol for the second time in as many days. More importantly, he had broken the invisible wall he had built around himself, and once a wall starts to crack, it's nearly impossible to repair. Captain Reynolds happened to walk past about an hour later. He paused, studying Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "I saw what you did earlier, helping that staff member." Marcus's stomach tightened. "Yes, sir. That was kind of you." Reynolds surprised him by saying, "Also completely against protocol." He let that hang in the air for a moment, then added, "But I suppose protocol doesn't account for basic human decency, does it?" "No, sir," Marcus replied carefully. Reynolds stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've been doing this for a long time, Thornhill. I've seen good men turn into statues. I've watched the job hollow people out until there's nothing left but the uniform. Some men thrive in this role. They find peace in the discipline, purpose in the service. Others—" He trailed off meaningfully. "Think about what I said earlier, about the promotion, but also think about whether this is really where you want to be." After Reynolds left, Marcus stood alone with his thoughts. His superior had essentially given him permission to question his entire career path. It was unsettling and liberating at the same time. That evening, Marcus arrived home to find Sarah and Emma in the middle of an art project. The dining table was covered with construction paper, glue, glitter, and markers. Emma was creating what appeared to be a family portrait, complete with stick figures and a house that defied all laws of perspective and physics. "Look, Dad," Emma held up her creation proudly. "This is us. That's you, that's Mom, that's me, and that's Biscuit." Biscuit was their elderly cat who spent most of his time sleeping in patches of sunlight. Marcus looked at the drawing. The stick figure representing him had a big smile and appeared to be holding Emma's hand. They were outside, surrounded by flowers and sunshine. It was such a simple image, but it struck him deeply. This was how his daughter saw him, or perhaps how she wished to see him. Happy, present, engaged with life. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm giving it to you to keep at work," Emma announced. So when you're standing still for a long time, you can remember us and smile. Sarah caught Marcus's eye over Emma's head. They shared a long look, one of those wordless conversations that couples develop over years together. She knew what was churning inside him, and her expression told him she would support whatever decision he needed to make. After Emma was in bed, Marcus and Sarah sat in their small backyard. It wasn't much, just a patch of grass and a few flower beds, but it was theirs. The night air was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. "I've been thinking about my father," Marcus said suddenly. "Do you remember what he used to say about his job at the factory?" Sarah nodded. "He said he traded his time for money, but he never let the job define who he was. He clocked in, did his work, and clocked out. Then he came home and actually lived his life. He coached my football team. He taught me to fix cars. He took us on camping trips." Marcus plucked at the grass absently. "I can't remember the last time I did something spontaneous with Emma. Everything is scheduled around my shifts. Everything is secondary to the job." "You do important work," Sarah said, but her tone was gentle, not argumentative. "Do I?" Marcus challenged. "I stand in a corridor. Yes, I'm protecting important people. Yes, it's necessary. But is it important enough to sacrifice everything else? To miss Emma's school plays because I can't get shift coverage? To be so physically exhausted that I fall asleep during family movie nights? To become so emotionally distant that my own daughter asks why I don't smile anymore?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that had been hovering between them all week. "What do you want to do?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I want to quit." Saying it out loud made it real. Terrifying, but real. Sarah didn't react with shock or panic, which he appreciated. She simply asked, "What would you do instead?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "That's the scariest part. I've been a guard for so long, I'm not sure what else I'm qualified for. Security work, maybe. Something with less prestige but more flexibility. More humanity." Sarah reached over and took Marcus's hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out. We always do. The question isn't whether we can manage financially or what job you'll do next. The question is whether you can live with yourself if you don't make a change." Marcus felt something release in his chest. Having Sarah's support made the terrifying decision feel possible. They talked for another hour, running through scenarios and possibilities. They had savings enough to cover them for a few months while Marcus searched for new employment. Sarah's job as a nurse was stable and paid well. They wouldn't be comfortable, but they wouldn't be destitute either. Thursday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky that threatened rain. Marcus dressed in his uniform, but it felt different now. Like wearing a costume for a play he no longer wanted to be in. As he drove to the palace, he made a decision. Today would be one of his last days. He would speak to Captain Reynolds, decline the promotion, and give his notice. The thought should have filled him with dread, but instead he felt something close to relief. His shift began normally. The palace was busy with preparations for some upcoming event. Staff rushed about with clipboards and concerned expressions. Marcus took his position and settled into the familiar stillness, but his mind was already elsewhere, imagining a future where his body and spirit were free to move together. Around 10 in the morning, Prince George appeared again. He was alone this time, which was unusual. The boy was carrying a book under his arm and seemed to be deep in thought. When he noticed Marcus, his face brightened. "Hello," George said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I remembered what you said. About bravery." Marcus allowed himself a small nod of acknowledgement. "I'm glad it was helpful, Your Highness. I used it in my essay for English class. My teacher said it was very insightful." George paused, then added with childlike directness, "Are you sad?" The question caught Marcus completely off guard. "Why do you ask that? You seem different today. Your eyes are sad even though your face isn't." George tilted his head, studying Marcus with an intensity that was surprising in someone so young. "My mother says that people carry sadness in different places. Some in their shoulders, some in their voices. She says the trick is learning to see it even when people try to hide it." Marcus felt exposed in a way he hadn't anticipated. This child, this small prince who would one day be king, had seen through the facade that Marcus had spent years perfecting. "I suppose I am a bit sad," Marcus admitted quietly. "But it's the kind of sadness that comes with making difficult decisions." "Good decisions or bad decisions?" George asked. "I think good ones, but they don't feel good yet." George seemed to consider this. When I had to switch schools, I was very sad even though everyone said it was for the best. My father told me that sometimes growing means leaving comfortable places behind, even when it hurts. Your father is a wise man, Marcus said. He has his moments. George replied with such perfect comic timing that Marcus had to suppress a smile. Then the boy's expression turned serious again. Will you be leaving? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus hadn't told anyone except Sarah about his intention to resign. How had this child intuited it? I'm considering it, yes. George nodded slowly as if he had expected this answer. I understand. My grandmother used to say that the bravest thing a person can do is admit when they need to change their path. She said staying somewhere you don't belong just because it's familiar is a different kind of cowardice. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Wisdom from a child passed down from a queen. I'll miss standing here, he said honestly. I'll miss knowing I'm protecting people who matter. You'll still matter, though, George said simply. Just in a different way. And whoever you protect next will be lucky to have you. A governess appeared at the end of the corridor calling for George. The boy gave Marcus one last smile and headed toward her, but he paused and looked back. Thank you for being here. And for being honest with me. Adults don't always do that. Marcus watched him go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Sadness at what he was leaving behind, but also a strange sense of being released. A 10-year-old prince had just given him permission to choose himself, to choose life over duty. The rest of his shift passed in a blur. Marcus found himself memorizing details he had long taken for granted. The way light filtered through the tall windows at different times of day. The echo of footsteps on marble. The faint smell of polish and flowers that always hung in the air. These would be his last days experiencing these sensory details, and he wanted to remember them. When his shift ended, Marcus went straight to Captain Reynolds' office. His superior was at his desk, reviewing documents with reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up when Marcus knocked. Thornhill, come in. Have you made a decision about the promotion? Marcus closed the door behind him and stood at attention, though it felt more like habit than necessity now. Yes, sir. I have to decline. Reynolds removed his glasses and set them aside. I see. May I ask why? I need to resign, sir. I'll give you the standard notice period, of course. But I can't continue in this role. There was a long silence. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with an expression that was hard to read. Finally, he spoke. I wondered if this was coming. You've been different this week. Less present even while standing in place. I apologize if my performance has been lacking, Marcus began, but Reynolds waved him off. Your performance has been impeccable, as always. That's not what I mean. The older man sighed, suddenly looking very tired. I told you I've been doing this for 30 years. What I didn't tell you is that I've lost 3 marriages and barely know my own children because of it. This job demands everything, Thornhill, and it gives back very little except a sense of duty and a good pension. Marcus was surprised by the candor. Do you regret it, sir? Every single day, Reynolds admitted. But I'm too old and too set in my ways to change now. You're not. You still have time to build a life that includes more than standing still. He pulled out a form from his desk drawer. I'll process your resignation. But I want you to know that you've been one of the finest guards I've had the privilege to serve with. Not because you're the most rigid or the most perfect, but because you never lost your humanity, even when the job tried to take it from you. Marcus felt emotion well up in his chest. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. They shook hands and Marcus left the office feeling lighter than he had in years. The official resignation would take a few weeks to process, but the decision was made. He was really doing this. That evening, he told Emma over dinner. She was quiet for a moment, processing the information with the seriousness she applied to all important matters. Does this mean you won't be a royal guard anymore? She asked. That's right, Marcus confirmed, but you'll still be brave? I hope so. Just in different ways. Emma thought about this, then nodded decisively. Okay, can you come to my school play next month then? I got cast as a tree. Marcus laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Marcus's final 2 weeks at Kensington Palace were both the longest and shortest of his career. Every shift felt weighted with significance as he mentally catalogued all the things he would soon leave behind. The predictability, the prestige, the sense of being part of something ancient and enduring, but also the isolation, the physical toll, the feeling of being a witness to life rather than a participant in it. His colleagues noticed the change in him immediately. During breaks in the guardhouse, Marcus found himself actually engaging in conversations instead of just nodding along. He asked Thomas about his plans for retirement, which was coming up in 6 months. He listened to younger guards talk about their aspirations and gently suggested they make sure those aspirations included lives outside the palace walls. "You sound like you're giving advice." From the other side, Thomas observed one afternoon. "Like you've already left even though you're still here." "Maybe I have," Marcus acknowledged. "Sometimes the hardest part of leaving is admitting you've already gone in your heart." Word spread quickly through the palace staff that Marcus Thornhill was resigning. In a workplace where people often stayed for decades, voluntary departures were noteworthy. Some colleagues were supportive, others confused, and a few seemed almost offended, as if his choice to leave was an implicit criticism of their choice to stay. Captain Reynolds called him in 3 days before his final shift. "There's been a request," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Prince William would like to speak with you." Marcus felt his heart skip. "The Prince of Wales, why?" "I assume it has something to do with George." "The young prince apparently mentioned your conversations to his father." Reynolds handed Marcus a slip of paper with a time and location. "Tomorrow morning before your shift. Don't be late." Marcus left the office in a daze. In 15 years, he had never had a private audience with any member of the royal family. Guards simply weren't significant enough to warrant personal attention. Yet here he was, summoned by the future king. That evening, Marcus barely slept. He ran through possible scenarios in his mind. Had he overstepped with George? Was this a reprimand? A formality before his departure? Sarah tried to reassure him, but even she couldn't hide her curiosity about what Prince William might want. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the palace 2 hours early. He was directed to a small private sitting room he had never entered before. It was elegant but comfortable, with family photos on the mantel and children's drawings displayed on a side table. These small personal touches made the royal family seem more real, more human. Prince William entered exactly on time. Marcus immediately stood and bowed, but the prince waved him to sit. "Please, Mr. Thornhill, this isn't a formal audience. I just wanted to speak with you before you left." "Your Royal Highness," Marcus managed, his mouth suddenly dry. William settled into the chair opposite him, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and assessing. "George told me about your conversations. He was quite taken with what you said about bravery and fear. I wanted to thank you for that. Finding people who will speak truthfully to him, who will treat him as a person rather than just a title, that's invaluable." "I only answered his questions honestly, sir," Marcus replied, "which is more than many people do. Most adults around him either defer to the point of being useless, or they try to use their access to him for their own benefit. You did neither." William paused. "He also told me you're leaving, that you seem sad about a difficult but necessary decision. I wanted to understand why." Marcus hadn't expected such directness. "Your Royal Highness, I've served here for 15 years. It's been an honor and a privilege, but somewhere along the way I lost myself in the role. I became the uniform instead of the man wearing it." William nodded slowly. "I understand that better than you might think. Being born into a role, raised to fulfill a duty, it can consume you if you're not careful. The difference is I don't have the option to walk away. You do, and I think that's extraordinarily brave." "I don't feel brave," Marcus admitted. "I feel terrified. I'm walking away from security, from prestige, from everything I've known as an adult. I have no idea what comes next." "That's precisely what makes it brave," William said. "George was right about that. Doing what's necessary despite the fear. You taught him that lesson, and apparently you needed to learn it yourself." They talked for another 20 minutes. William asked about Marcus's family, his plans, his concerns. It was surreal, sitting across from the future king and discussing life as if they were just two men trying to navigate complicated choices. At one point, William shared his own struggles with finding balance between duty and family, between being a prince and being a father. "The job never stops asking for more," William said. "It will take everything you give it and still demand more. The only way to survive is to draw lines to protect the parts of yourself that matter most. You're drawing those lines now. Better late than never." As the conversation wound down, William stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for your years of service, Mr. Thornhill. More importantly, thank you for showing my son that authenticity and kindness matter more than protocol. Marcus shook his hand, feeling a profound sense of closure. Thank you, Your Royal Highness, for this conversation, for understanding. Good luck out there, William said with a genuine smile. I suspect you'll do well. Men who have the courage to change rarely fail at what comes next. Marcus left the sitting room feeling like he was floating. The prince's words had validated something deep within him. He wasn't running away from responsibility. He was running toward a more authentic life. There was dignity in that choice. His second-to-last shift passed in a contemplative haze. Marcus found himself noticing small details he had overlooked before. The way afternoon light made the gold picture frames glow, the particular squeak of the floorboard near the east window, the distant sound of piano practice drifting from one of the music rooms. These were the textures of his life for 15 years, and soon they would belong to someone else. Near the end of his shift, George appeared one final time. He was carrying a small wrapped package, poorly done with too much tape and uneven folds, the work of a child trying to be neat but not quite managing it. I made you something, George said, glancing around to make sure they were alone. For your leaving. Marcus's throat tightened. Your Highness, you didn't need to do that. I know. I wanted to. George thrust the package forward. You can open it later if you want, when you're not working. Marcus accepted the gift carefully. Thank you. This means a great deal to me. Will you be happy? George asked suddenly. When you leave here? It was such a simple question, but it cut right to the heart of everything. I think so, Marcus said honestly. I think I'll remember my time here with respect and gratitude, but I'll also be relieved to find out who I am when I'm not standing still. George nodded seriously, as if he understood far more than a 10-year-old should. My great-grandmother used to say that life is too short to spend it being someone you're not. I think you're being very wise. After George left, Marcus carefully tucked the gift into his uniform pocket. He wouldn't open it until he was home, in his own space where he could react honestly without worrying about maintaining composure. The rest of the shift passed without incident. When the clock finally marked the end of his duty, Marcus remained in position for one extra moment. A self-imposed pause to mark the ending. Then he took a deep breath, stepped away from his post for the final time, and walked toward the guardhouse to change. Several colleagues were waiting for him there. Thomas presented him with a card signed by the entire guard staff. Inside were messages of support, some joking, some heartfelt. Don't forget us when you're living your exciting new life, Thomas said gruffly, clearly emotional. Impossible, Marcus replied, meaning it. You lot have been like brothers. That doesn't end just because I'm changing jobs. He changed out of his uniform slowly, folding each piece with the care it deserved. The black jacket with its perfect creases, the trousers with the sharp line down the front, the boots polished to mirror brightness. He placed them in his locker one final time, then closed the door. That chapter was officially finished. In his car, before starting the engine, Marcus finally opened George's gift. Inside the wrapping paper was a drawing, clearly done by the young prince himself. It showed two figures, one tall in a black uniform, one small in casual clothes, standing together in what appeared to be the palace corridor. Above them, in careful letters, George had written, "Thank you for being brave enough to be kind." Marcus sat in his car and cried. Not sad tears exactly, but tears of release, of gratitude, of recognition that his time at the palace had mattered, that he had touched at least one life in a meaningful way. That was worth more than any promotion or pension could ever be. He carefully placed the drawing in the folder with his other important documents, started the car, and drove away from Kensington Palace. In his rearview mirror, the building grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. Marcus Thornhill, former Royal Sentinel, was going home, and for the first time in 15 years he was smiling. 3 months after leaving the palace, Marcus stood in the small community center on a Tuesday evening, watching a group of teenagers learn basic self-defense techniques. He was dressed in simple athletic clothes, his hair slightly longer than it had been during his guard days, and his face more relaxed than it had been in years. Remember, he told the class, awareness is your first line of defense. Pay attention to your surroundings. Trust your instincts. Confidence in how you carry yourself can prevent trouble before it starts. A girl of about 15 raised her hand. Mr. Thornhill, is it true you used to guard the royal family? Marcus smiled. I did. For 15 years. "That must have been amazing," another student chimed in. "Why would you leave that to teach us?" It was a question he had been asked many times in the past few months by family, friends, and new acquaintances. Each time his answer became clearer. Because this is where I'm supposed to be. Making a real difference in people's lives, not just standing guard over them. After the class ended, Marcus locked up the community center and headed home. The job didn't pay as well as palace work, and the prestige was non-existent, but it filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He was teaching young people practical skills while also mentoring them, offering guidance, being present in their lives in a way that mattered. The transition hadn't been easy. The first month after leaving the palace had been disorienting. Marcus had felt adrift without the structure and routine that had defined his adult life. He would wake up at odd hours, his body still programmed for shift work. He found himself standing too rigidly in social situations, uncomfortable with casual movement and relaxed postures. Sarah had been patient through it all, gently encouraging him to rediscover who he was beyond the uniform. They took long walks together, something they hadn't done in years. They stayed up late talking about dreams they had set aside, possibilities they might now explore. Emma had been thrilled to have her father truly present. Marcus had attended her school play, sitting in the front row and cheering embarrassingly loud when she took the stage as a tree. He had helped her with homework not because it fit into a tight schedule, but because he had the time and energy to engage fully. He coached her weekend football team, something he never could have done while working palace shifts. The financial adjustment had required sacrifices. They had downsized their lifestyle, cutting unnecessary expenses and being more careful with their budget, but the trade-off was worth it. Marcus measured his wealth now in moments rather than money. In Emma's laughter, in Sarah's less stressed expression, in his own ability to sleep through the night without his body aching from hours of standing. He had taken a combination of security consulting work and teaching positions to make ends meet. A local college hired him to teach a course on personal safety and security protocols. The community center brought him in to run self-defense classes for various age groups. A few small businesses contracted him to assess their security systems and train their staff. It was diverse work, engaging work, work that allowed him to use his skills while actually connecting with people. He wasn't a statue anymore. He was a teacher, a consultant, a mentor. He was Marcus again, not just Thornhill the guard. When he arrived home that evening, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner while Emma did homework at the table. Biscuit the cat was curled up in his favorite chair, opening one eye to acknowledge Marcus's arrival before going back to sleep. "How was class?" Sarah asked, stirring something that smelled delicious. "Good, really good, actually. There's a girl in the group, Mia, who reminds me a lot of Emma. Quiet but observant. She asked some really insightful questions today about situational awareness." "That's lovely," Sarah said, then added with a knowing smile. "You're happy?" It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. "I really am. It's strange. I thought leaving the palace would feel like failure, like I was giving up something important. But it feels like the opposite, like I finally started living." After dinner, while Sarah and Emma watched television together, Marcus went to his small home office. He had framed George's drawing and hung it on the wall above his desk. It was a reminder of the catalyst that had changed his life. A child's simple act of kindness and recognition had opened a door Marcus hadn't even known was there. He sometimes wondered what George was doing now, how the young prince was growing and learning. Marcus had no contact with the palace anymore, no window into that world he had left behind, but he hoped George would remember their conversations. More importantly, he hoped the boy would hold on to his compassion and his ability to see people as individuals rather than functions. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas, his former colleague. They had stayed in touch, meeting for coffee once a month to catch up. The message was brief. "Reynolds is retiring. Thought you'd want to know. Says he's going to finally learn who he is outside the uniform. Your influence, mate." Marcus smiled and typed back a reply. "Better late than never. Tell him I said congratulations." It was a small thing, but it mattered. Reynolds, who had admitted to a lifetime of regret about choices not made, was finally choosing himself. Maybe Marcus's decision to leave had planted a seed, shown others that change was possible even when it seemed too late. The weekend brought a surprise. Marcus and his family were at the park, enjoying a rare sunny Saturday afternoon. Emma was on the swings while Marcus and Sarah sat on a nearby bench watching her play. The park was busy with families, dogs, and people enjoying the weather. A black car pulled up near the park entrance, and Marcus felt a familiar prickling sensation. Years of security training didn't just disappear. He watched as the car door opened and a family emerged. Casual clothes, sunglasses, attempting to blend in but not quite managing it. It was Prince William, Princess Catherine, and their 3 children. They had a security detail, discreet but present, and they were clearly trying to have a normal family outing. Marcus instinctively looked away, ready to give them privacy, but then George spotted him. The young prince said something to his father and pointed in Marcus's direction. William looked over, seemed to recognize Marcus, and after a brief conversation with his security team, walked over with George. "Mr. Thornhill," William greeted him warmly. "What a surprise." Marcus stood, shaking the offered hand. "Your Royal Highness, this is my wife, Sarah." Sarah had gone slightly pale but managed a composed greeting. William was gracious and charming, putting them both at ease quickly. George was bouncing on his toes, clearly excited. "How are you?" George asked Marcus directly. "Are you happy now?" It was the same question he had asked months ago in the palace corridor. Marcus crouched down to George's eye level. "I'm very happy. Thank you for asking, and thank you for this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing everything that had changed. "You helped me see that it was okay to choose myself." George beamed. "I told Dad you were brave." He agreed. William placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "We won't keep you from your family time. I just wanted to say hello and to tell you that your replacement is doing well, but the corridor isn't quite the same without you. Several staff members have mentioned missing your presence." "That's kind of them," Marcus said, genuinely touched. "George asked me to pass along a message if I ever saw you." William continued with a slight smile. "He wanted you to know that he used your words about bravery in another essay and got top marks. He's quite proud of that." Marcus looked at George. "I'm proud of you too. Keep asking good questions and thinking deeply. The world needs more of that." The royal family moved on to enjoy their park visit, and Marcus returned to his bench beside Sarah, who was staring at him in amazement. "That just happened," she said faintly. "The future king just walked over to chat with you in the park. Strange, isn't it?" Marcus agreed. "A few months ago I was invisible to them even though I saw them every day. Now I'm visible again, just as a regular person." Emma ran up, breathless from swinging. "Dad, was that really Prince William and Prince George?" "It was," Marcus confirmed. "That's so cool." "What did they say?" "They said hello. And George mentioned he's doing well in school." Emma processed this with the remarkable adaptability of children. "Okay, can we get ice cream now?" They walked to the ice cream shop at the edge of the park, a simple family enjoying a simple afternoon. Marcus watched Emma debate between chocolate and strawberry, with the same serious concentration she applied to all important decisions. He held Sarah's hand and felt the warmth of the sun on his face. This was his life now. No uniforms, no protocols, no standing still while the world moved around him. Just movement and moments and the messy, beautiful reality of being fully human. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Marcus stood in his backyard looking up at the stars. Sarah joined him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "No regrets?" she asked softly. Marcus thought about the question seriously. Did he miss aspects of his old life? The sense of history, the prestige, the clear purpose? Sometimes. But those feelings were vastly overshadowed by what he had gained. "No regrets," he said finally. "I'm grateful for the years I served. They taught me discipline, dedication, and the importance of duty. But I'm more grateful that I found the courage to leave when staying would have cost me everything that truly matters." "That young prince really did change your life," Sarah observed. "He showed me what I already knew but was afraid to admit," Marcus corrected. "Sometimes all it takes is one person seeing you, really seeing you, to wake you up to your own truth. George did that. A 10-year-old boy with more wisdom than most adults." Inside the house, Marcus could see Emma's school drawing still taped to the refrigerator. It was a new one, created just last week. It showed Marcus teaching his self-defense class, surrounded by students, everyone smiling. At the top, she had written, "My dad, the teacher." That's who he was now. Not Marcus the Royal Sentinel. Not Marcus the guard, just Marcus. Father, husband, teacher, consultant, friend. A man who had learned that true bravery wasn't standing still in the face of duty. It was moving forward in the face of fear. He thought about George occasionally, wondering if the young prince understood the profound impact their brief encounters had made. Probably not. Children rarely realize when they change someone's life with simple honesty, but someday when George was older, perhaps he would remember the guard who listened to him, who spoke to him truthfully, and who chose to follow his own advice about bravery. Marcus hoped that George would grow up to be the kind of king who valued people over protocols, who understood that true service meant recognizing humanity in everyone, regardless of their position. If their conversations had planted even a small seed toward that future, then Marcus's 15 years at the palace had been worth every moment. The night air was cool and comfortable. Marcus took one last look at the stars, then followed Sarah back inside. Tomorrow would bring new classes to teach, new people to help, new moments to fully experience. And Marcus Thornhill, no longer a sentinel, no longer standing still, was ready for all of it.